Hey everyone, Greg Staley here from Diverge Media. Obviously not a regular time. We normally live stream at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, but we wanted to get out an episode for you today about specifically why people follow orders that maybe don't make any sense. The reason for the change in time is obviously with the lockdowns, things changed quickly, and so did our plans. So we're still going to see family, and so it changed time frame on things, and that is why we changed the time frame on when we're bringing this to you. But I wanted to bring two things to everyone's attention. There's two specific human psychology experiments that I think highlight pretty well what's going on in our society today, and that's the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiments. Now, both of these I think will illustrate very effectively why people just follow orders. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Can you pop up the screen share? I know you're busy there. Yeah. Sorry, everyone. So this is the Milgram shock experiment. This is simple psychology, or simply psychology rather. Seem to have a lot of good sources on it for just these different experiments, but let's go. One of the most famous studies of obedience in psychology was carried out by Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University. He conducted an experiment focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. So I think this highlights exactly what we're going through. The focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. All right, Milgram, 1963, examined justifications for acts of genocide offered by those accused at the World War II Nuremberg War criminal trials. Their defense often was based on, quote, obedience, that they were just following orders from their superiors. The experiments began in July 1961, a year after the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Milgram devised the experiments to answer the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? Milgram, 1974. Milgram, 1963. He wanted to investigate whether Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was a common explanation for the Nazi killings in World War II. Milgram selected participants for his experiment by newspaper advertising for male participants to take part in a study of learning at Yale University. The procedure was that the participant was paired with another person, and they drew lots to find out who would be the, quote, learner. Oh, sorry, everyone. And who would be the teacher. Yeah, I see you, Mom. Sorry. Sorry, everyone. I'll just turn this volume off for a few minutes. Come on. All right. The procedure was that the participant was paired with another person, and they drew lots to find out who would be, quote, the learner and who would be, quote, the teacher. The draw was fixed so that the participant was always the teacher, and the learner was one of Milgram's confederates pretending to be a real participant. The learner, a confederate called Mr. Wallace, was taken into a room and had electrodes attached to his arm, and his teacher and researcher went into a room next door that contained an electric shock generator and a row of switches marked from 15 volts, slight shock, to 375 volts, danger, severe shock, to 450 volts, and it just said triple X on the switch. So they had different titles underneath each one, and they explained this in a different one. I guess this isn't the one I was looking at last night, but still. And then underneath each of them, it said different, like slightly stronger shock, intense shock, severe shock, and it gradually increased. So, aim of the study. Milgram, 1963, was interested in researching how far people would go in obeying an instruction if it involved harming another person. Okay. Stanley Milgram was interested in how easily ordinary people could be influenced into committing atrocities. For example, Germans in World War II. Volunteers for the procedure. Volunteers were recruited for a controlled experiment investigating learning. Participants were 40 males aged between 20 and 50 years old, whose jobs were ranged from unskilled to professional from the New Haven area. They were paid $4.50 just for turning up. At the beginning of the experiment, they were introduced to another participant who was a confederate of the experimenter, Milgram. They drew straws to determine their roles, learner or teacher, although this was fixed and the confederate was always the learner. There was also an experimenter dressed in a gray lab coat played by an actor, not Milgram. 2 rooms in the Yale Interaction Laboratory were used, one for the learner with an electric chair and another for the teacher and experimenter with the electric shock generator. The learner was strapped into the chair with electrodes. After he learned a list of words that were given to him, the teacher tested him by naming a word and asking the learner to recall its partner pair from a list of 4 possible choices. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake, increasing the level of shock each time. So pretty simple experiment. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake, and they're supposed to recall a list of word pairs that were given to them. Every time they're wrong, they get shocked. And the job of the person that they recruited was to shock them every time they got it wrong. So they basically, the experiment set up how far would they go to just follow orders. There were 30 switches on the shock generator marked from 15 volts, slight shock to 450, danger, severe. The learner gave mainly wrong answers on purpose. And for each of these, the teacher gave him an electric shock. When the teacher refused to administer the shock, the experimenter was to give a series of orders and prods to ensure they continued. Wow, sound eerily familiar. When I'm talking about eerily familiar, I mean the prods. We have societal prods right now on the COVID front. This is why I bring all this in. And the societal prods are shaming, calling people names, and in general, just declaring them almost bad people. So I thought this was very interesting and puts it in a different context for everyone. There are 4 prods, and if one not obeyed, then the experimenter, Mr. Williams, read out the next prod and so on. Prod 1, please continue. Prod 2, the experiment requires you to continue. Prod 3, it is absolutely essential that you continue. Prod 4, you have no other choice but to continue. Results. Now, for everyone here, pop me back on screen. Everyone here, any guess in the comments section on how many people just followed orders based on the prods they were given? Any idea that? What are you doing? Frozen. Okay, well, they're off now. All right. If you can put your guess in the comments section, I think it would add a little bit more to this live stream. If not, it's okay. We'll get right back into it. But I, for one, am not shocked at the percentage of people that just followed orders. But I think maybe some here will be. So let's go back to it. Milgram experiment results. 65%. You want to pull it up again? 2/3 of participants, i.e. teachers, continued to the highest level of 450 volts. Now keep in mind, they did not know that it was an experiment. They didn't know this. They can hear the screams and things like this, but they weren't able to actually know what was going on. All the participants continued to at least 300 volts though. So 65% went all the way to switching an electric switch that they thought was eerily dangerous. It said XXX. That's what they did. 65% of the people went to the final conclusion of it. 2/3 of participants. Milgram did one more experiment. He carried out 18 variations of this study. All he did was alter the situation to see how this affected obedience. Conclusion. Ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure, even to the extent of killing an innocent human being. Obedience to authority is ingrained in us all the way from the way we are brought up. People tend to obey orders from other people if they recognize their authority is morally right and are legally based. Now, your government, everybody believes they're legally based and it's morally right to follow them. Okay, so it's important to keep this in mind as we go into this next lockdown. Why do people keep following orders that make absolutely no sense? Add into the fact that we've reiterated time and time again that following orders is the right thing to do, and that if you wear people down and you repeat something enough times, people will begin to believe it and not be able to think really much differently from what you've told them. And we've been at this for 9 months with this narrative. Obedience to authority is ingrained in all of us. People tend to obey orders from other people if they recognize their authority is morally right and legally based. This response to legitimate authority is learned in a variety of situations. Sorry, everyone. Obviously, I got kids running around and it's Christmas Eve. Cut me some slack. For example, in the family, school, and workplace, Milgram summed up in the article the perils of obedience. And we will link these experiments in the description below, but we're just trying to rush it to get it out because, yeah, it just kind of impromptu today. Sorry, everyone. But in his writing, he wrote, the legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are an enormous import, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary person would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. An experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject participants' strongest moral imperatives against hurting others, and the subjects, ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. So you imagine somebody being like an actor, mind you, but screaming at the top of their lungs in pain, stop, all sorts of this kind of thing. Stop, it hurts. This is what was going on in the experience. And 65% went to the final conclusion. And everyone went to at least 300 volts. Okay, so his agency theory, he explained the behavior of the autonomous state. People direct their own actions and they take responsibility for the results of those actions. The agenic state, people allow others to direct their actions and then pass off that responsibility for the consequences to the person giving orders. I was just following orders. It's his fault. It's their fault. In other words, they act as agents for another person's will. Milgram suggested that two things must be in place for a person to enter the agentic state. Sorry, everyone. The person giving the orders is perceived as being qualified to direct other people's behavior. People perceive our government as being qualified to direct their behavior. People perceive our health officers as being qualified to direct their behavior and legitimate, even though they say, according to Dr. Yaffe and Dr. Williams, ha 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 ha, I just say whatever they write down for me. Number two, the person being ordered is able to believe that the authority will accept responsibility for what happens. Agency theory says that people will obey an authority when they believe that the authority will take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. This is supposed by some of Milgram's evidence. So we'll detail it in here. There's lots of other good stuff in here. But that's basically the introduction to that experiment. Goes into more detail, like the different shock levels, what they were telling at each part, social support conditions. Two other participants, Confederates, who were also teachers, refused to obey. Confederate 1 stopped at 150, and Confederate 2 stopped at 210. So I guess they had two people that didn't go to the 300 level. The presence of others who are seen to disobey the authority figure reduces the level of obedience to 10%. So they ran 18 variations. This might be on the variations, but I'm just reading from what they've written here. So we'll go from that to the Stanford prison experiment. Purpose of this study. Zimbardo and his colleagues in 1973 were interested in finding out whether the brutality reported among guards in American prisons was due to the sadistic personalities of the guards. Was it dispositional, or did it have more to do with the prison environment? Was it situational? For example, prisoner and guards may have personalities which make conflict inevitable, with prisoners lacking respect for law and order and guards being domineering and aggressive. Alternatively, prisoners and guards may behave in a hostile manner due to the rigid power structure of the social environment in prisons. Zimbardo predicted the situation made people act the way they do rather than their disposition, personality. To study the roles, people play in prison situations, Zimbardo converted a basement of the Stanford University psychology building into a mock prison. He advertised asking for volunteers to participate in a study of the psychological effects of prison life. The 75 applicants who answered the ad were given diagnostic interviews and personality tests to eliminate candidates with psychological problems, medical disabilities, or a history of crime or drug abuse. 24 men, judged to be the most physically and mentally stable, the most mature, and the least involved in antisocial behaviors, were chosen to participate. The participants did not know each other prior to the study and were paid $15 per day to take part in the experiment. Participants were randomly assigned to either the role of prisoner or guard in a simulated prison environment. There were 2 reserves and 1 dropped out, finally leaving 10 prisoners and 11 guards. Prisoners were treated like every other criminal, being arrested at their own homes without warning and taken to the local police station. They were fingerprinted, photographed, and booked. Then they were blindfolded and driven to the psychology department of Stanford University, where Zimbardo had the basement set out as a prison, with barred doors and windows, bare walls, and small cells. Here, the de-individuation process began. When the prisoners arrived at the prison, they were stripped naked, deloused, had all their personal possessions removed and locked away, and were given prison clothes and bedding. They were issued a uniform and referred to by their number only. The use of ID numbers was a way to make prisoners feel anonymous. Each prisoner had to be called only by his ID number and could only refer to himself and the other prisoners by number. Their clothes comprised a smock with their number written on it, but no underclothes. They had a tight nylon cap to cover their hair and a locked chain around one ankle. All guards were dressed in identical uniforms of khaki, and they carried a whistle around their neck and a billy club borrowed from the police. Guards also wore special sunglasses to make eye contact with prisoners impossible. 3 guards worked shifts of 8 hours each. The other guards remained on call. Guards were instructed to do whatever they thought was necessary to maintain law and order in the prison and to command the respect of the prisoners. No physical violence was permitted. Zimbardo observed the behavior of the prisoners and guards as a researcher and also acted as a prison warden. Within a very short time, both guards and prisoners were settling into their new roles, with the guards adopting theirs quickly and easily. Asserting authority, within hours of the experiment, some guards began to harass prisoners. At 2:30 a.m., prisoners were awakened from sleep by blasting whistles for the first of many counts. The counts served as a way to familiarizing the prisoners with their numbers. More importantly, they provided a regular occasion for the guards to exercise control over the prisoners. Now, this is already crazy, right? This is a volunteer experiment where they're being paid to be there. They're told not to be violent, and they're already subjecting themselves to cruel and unusual punishment, anything to keep them in check. 2:30 a.m., blasting whistles to wake them up, to basically force the prisoners to remember their ID number that they were given. Okay, the prisoners soon adopted prison-like behavior too. They talked about prison issues a great deal of the time. They told tales on each other to the guards. They started taking the prisoner rules very seriously, as though they were there for the prisoner's benefit. An infringement would spell disaster for all of them. Some even began siding with the guards against prisoners who did not obey the rules. Physical punishment. The prisoners were taunted with insults and petty orders. They were given pointless and boring tasks to accomplish, and they were generally dehumanized. Push-ups were a common form of physical punishment imposed by the guards, and one of the guards stepped on the prisoners' backs while they did push-ups, or made other prisoners sit on the backs of fellow prisoners doing push-ups. Picture there. Because the first day passed without incident, the guards were surprised and totally unprepared for the rebellion which broke out the morning on the second day. During the second day of the experiment, the prisoners removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells by putting their beds against the door. The guards called in reinforcements. The 3 guards who were waiting on standby duty came in, and the night shift guards voluntarily remained on duty. There's videos in here as well. I might go back. How long is this one? 47 seconds. Let's see what's up. Because the first day passed without incident, trials and totally unfair for the rebellion which broke out on the second day. Stopped, so ripped off their numbers and barricaded themselves inside the cells, and put their beds against the door. Prisoners began to talk and press the guards to their face. This, of course, embarrassed and upset the guards. The morning shift immediately called in reinforcements. They asked the night shift to stay on, but they told them the other standby guards to help put down the rebellion. So basically what we just read, but I think it's important to have the visual as well. Putting down the rebellion, the guards reiterated by using a fire extinguisher which shot a stream of skin-chilling carbon dioxide, and they forced the prisoners away from the doors. Next, the guards broke into each cell, stripped the prisoners naked, and took the beds out. Volunteer experiment, everyone. The ringleaders of the prisoner rebellion were placed into solitary confinement. After this, the guards generally began to harass and intimidate the prisoners. Special privileges. One of the 3 cells was designated as a privileged cell. The 3 prisoners least involved in the rebellion were given special privileges. The guards gave them back their uniforms and beds and allowed them to wash their hair and brush their teeth. Privileged prisoners also got to eat special food in the presence of other prisoners who had temporarily lost the privilege of eating. The effect was to break solidarity among prisoners. Consequences of the rebellion. Over the next few days, the relationship between the guards and prisoners changed, with a change in one leading to a change in the other. Remember, the guards were firmly in control and the prisoners were totally dependent on them. As the prisoners became more dependent, the guards became more derisive towards them. This is where we're heading. I hate to be so blunt. I'm going to enjoy today. I'm going to enjoy Christmas and stop thinking about this stuff for a little bit, but I think this is important. They held the prisoners in contempt and let the prisoners know it. As the guards' contempt for them grew, the prisoners became more submissive. As the prisoners became more submissive, the guards became more aggressive and assertive. Well, if I just do what they tell me, it's going to get better. Well, if I just follow orders, it's going to get better. Just put on the mask. It will get better. As the prisoners became more submissive, the guards became more aggressive and assertive. And this is a free or a paid experiment, completely voluntarily, though. And this is how people behaved. They demanded ever greater obedience from the prisoners. The prisoners were dependent on the guards for everything, so tried to find ways to please the guards, such as telling tales on fellow prisoners, meaning tattling, ratting them out, throwing others under the bus. Snitch lines, COVID, everyone, right? Where are we at? Prisoner 8612. Less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner 8612 began suffering from an acute emotional disturbance, disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, and rage. After a meeting with the guards where they told him he was weak, but offered him informant status, 8612 returned to the other prisoners and said, "You can't leave, you can't quit." Soon, 8612 began to act crazy, to scream, to curse, to go into rage that seemed out of control. It wasn't until this point that the psychologists realized they had to let him out. A visit from parents. The next day, the guards held a visiting hour for parents and friends. They were worried that when the parents saw the state of the jail, they might insist on their son's going home. Guards washed the prisoners, had them clean and polish their cells, fed them a big dinner, and played music on the intercom. After the visit, rumors spread of a mass escape plan. Afraid that they would lose the prisoners, the guards and experimenters tried to enlist help in facilities of the Palo Alto Police Department. The guards again escalated the level of harassment, forcing them to do menial, repetitive work such as cleaning toilets with their bare hands. Catholic priest. Zimbardo invited a Catholic priest who had been a prison chaplain to evaluate how realistic our prison situation was. Half of the prisoners introduced themselves by their number rather than their name. In a voluntary experiment, they introduced themselves as a number rather than their actual name. The chaplain interviewed each prisoner individually. The priest told them the only way they would get out was with the help of a lawyer. Prisoner 819. Eventually, while talking to the priest, 819 broke down and began to cry hysterically, just as two previously released prisoners had. The psychologist removed the chain from his foot, the cap off his head, and told him go and rest in a room that was adjacent to the prison yard. They told him that they would get him some food and then take him to see a doctor. While this was going on, one of the guards lined up the other prisoners and had them chant aloud. Prisoner 819 is a bad prisoner. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess, Mr. Correctional Officer. Keep in mind, people that are just following orders, they might see something wrong. Broke down and then were shamed in this experiment, shamed. And then what happens as a result of that? Even if you know the truth, you might go along with it. Why? They were shamed, and what happened? The psychologist realized 819 could hear the chanting and went back into the room where they found him sobbing uncontrollably. The psychologist tried to get him to agree to leave the experiment, but he said he could not leave because the others had labeled him a bad prisoner. The others had labeled him a bad prisoner, just like if you go against the current narrative, you're a bad citizen. You're a heartless citizen. You're a selfish citizen. You don't care about others. You're not doing your part. Do we see the parallels? This is why I bring all this up. Back to reality. At this point, Zimbardo said, listen, you are not 819. You are blank your name. And my name is Dr. Zimbardo, and I'm a psychologist, not a prison superintendent. And this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment. And those are students, not prisoners, just like you. Let's go. He stopped crying suddenly, looked up and replied, okay, let's go, as if nothing had been wrong. The narrative had been broken. The permission had been given. An end to the experiment. Zimbardo had intended that the experiment... had intended that the experiment should run for 2 weeks, but on the 6th day, it was terminated due to the emotional breakdowns of prisoners and excessive aggression of the guards. Christina Maslock, A recent Stanford PhD brought into conduct interviews with the guards and prisoners. Strongly objected when she saw the prisoners being abused by the guards. Filled with outrage, she said, "It's terrible what you are doing to these boys." Out of 50 or more outsiders who had seen the prison, she was the only one who ever questioned its morality. 50 plus people had seen the experiment outside of Zimbardo, and she was the only one. Does your voice matter? Absolutely. 1 out of 50. What is that as a percentage? Your voice matters on the subject. Absolutely matters. You might be the only one who can break the narrative. Zimbardo in 2008 later noted, "It wasn't until much later that I realized how far into my prison role I was at that point, that I was thinking like a prison superintendent rather than a research psychologist." That's the man who organized it, got so caught up in it. Human behavior is a super powerful thing, and if we don't understand what's going on, we don't stand a chance. Go back into the conclusion here. According to Zimbardo and his colleagues, the Stanford prison experiment revealed how people will readily conform to the social roles they are expected to play, especially if the roles are as strongly stereotyped as those of prison guards. Especially if the roles are strongly stereotyped as those of prison guards. Well, how strongly stereotyped is the role of a good citizen right now if you don't believe in, per se, wearing the mask, because you know that in 2018, the Ontario Nursing Association won in court and proved they weren't effective, or that there's medical studies that going back to 1975 that indicate that they have marginal benefit at best in the perfect environments, and that it's likely there actually is evidence that they are beneficial to not be worn to prevent infection in surgical environments. And now I've done an article on that. You can go look up. The name escapes me at the moment. But again, these parallels are so strong in behavior, and people need to understand this. And please share it out. I know this is a last minute one, but honestly, this is so important. I'll probably talk about it again in my next live stream a little more in depth. And I think I'm going to write some articles on this because people need to know. I'll continue. The prison environment was an important factor in creating the guards' brutal behavior. So the environment was an important. Well, what's the environment we've created around COVID? We all know. Instinctively, we know. If you speak out against this, you're heartless. If you question things, you're a conspiracy theorist, to the point where politicians are towing the line that maybe you're questioning things. And again, it's if you set the anchor point so far away from the truth that when people pull back and they think they're being reasonable, they're still way further from the truth than they would be otherwise. Therefore, the findings to support the situational explanation of behavior rather than the dispositional one. Zimbardo proposed the two processes can explain prisoners' final submission. 1. De-individualization may explain the behavior of the participants, especially the guards. It's for the greater good, guys. Just put on the mask. It's for, you know what? It's about society. It's not about you. It's just a short-term thing. Just give up your freedom for a little bit. You just stop thinking about yourself and just conform. De-individualization. Okay? This is a state when you become so immersed in the norms of the group that you lose your sense of identity and personal responsibility. The guards may have been so sadistic because they did not feel what happened was down to them personally. It was the group norm. Where are we at with COVID? The also may have lost their personal identity because of the uniform they wore. Also, learned helplessness could explain the prisoner's submission to the guards. The prisoners learned that whatever they did had little effect on what happened to them. Where are we at with COVID? In the mock prison, the unpredictable decisions of the guards led the prisoners to give up responding. After the prison experiment was terminated, Zimbardo interviewed the participants. Here's an excerpt. Quote, "Most of the participants said they had felt involved and committed. The research had felt real to them. One guard said, I was surprised at myself. I made them call each other names and clean toilets out with their bare hands. I practically considered the prisoners cattle, and I kept thinking I had to watch out for them in case they tried something." Another guard said, "Acting authoritatively can be fun. That's chilling, but thank you for the honest admission. Power can be a great pleasure." And another, "During the inspection, I went to cell 2 to mess up a bed which a prisoner had just made, and he had grabbed me, screaming that he had just made it and that he was not going to let me mess it up. He grabbed me by the throat, and although he was laughing, I was pretty scared. I lashed out with my stick and hit him on the chin, although not very hard, and when I freed myself, I became angry." Most of the guards found it difficult to believe that they had behaved in the brutalizing ways they had. Think Nuremberg trials. They all said we were just following orders and were ashamed. Many were ashamed. Let's not repeat history. Many said they didn't know the side of them existed or that they were capable of such things. The prisoners, too, couldn't believe that they had responded in the submissive, cowering, dependent way that they had. Several claimed to be assertive types normally. When asked about the guards, they described the usual stereotypes that can be found in any prison. Some guards were good, some were tough but fair, and some were cruel. Critical evaluation. The man characteristics could explain the findings of the study. Most of the guards later claimed they were simply acting. Because the guards and prisoners were playing a role, their behavior may not be influenced by the same factors which affect behavior in real life. This means studies' findings cannot be reasonably generalized to real life, such as prison settings, i.e. the study has low ecological validity. So, however, there is considerable evidence that the participants did react to the situation as though it was real, including their own words. For example, 90% of prisoners' private conversations, which were monitored by the researchers, were on the prison conditions, and only 10% of the time were the conversations about life outside of the prison. The guards, too, rarely exchanged personal information during their relaxation breaks. They either talked about problem prisoners, other prison topics, or did not talk at all. The guards were always on time and even worked overtime for no extra pay. When the prisoners were introduced to a priest, I'd say this is pretty close to home. They referred to themselves by their prison number rather than their first name. Some even asked him to get a lawyer to help them get out. The study may also lack population validity so again, needs a bigger population size. They're trying to explain why, it's an uncomfortable topic, and I almost feel like you don't want to believe it. A strength of the study is that it has altered the way U.S. prisons are run. For example, juveniles accused of federal crimes are no longer housed before trial with the adult prisoners due to the risk of violence against them. Another strength of the study is the harmful treatment of participants led to the formal recognition of ethical guidelines by the American Psychological Association. Studies must now undergo an extensive review by an institutional review board before they are implemented. A review of research plans by a panel is required by most institutions, such as universities, hospitals, government agencies. And these boards may request researchers make changes to the study's design or procedure. In extreme cases, deny approval of the study altogether. All right, go back to my screen here. So, with what's going on right now, why do people just follow orders? I think those are two extremely relevant examples. The environment, the de-individualization, and this is why making the statement to yourself where you're going to stand no matter what happens is so important. Truth matters. Integrity matters. Character matters. And if you're not willing to speak for it now, and if you're not willing to stand for it now, do not expect you'll stand for it later. Remember, in that prison experiment, only 1 out of 50 people that had seen the prison environment spoke out. There's a book that comes to mind. Etienne de Labois wrote it 400 to 500 years ago. I've written an article on it. Basically, there is always going to be a willing populace that is willing to be the hands of the tyrant. They're going to be willing. They want to have the opportunity to exert powers over others. So given the opportunity, the environment, they will do so, as we've seen in the Stanford prison experiment. This Christmas, we've been locked down without much evidence. And are we just accepting it based on the legitimacy of the authority itself? Are we looking at the facts? We've written about anchor points. We've talked about that. You can check out our videos on anchor points. If the truth is here and you tell the lie over here, and that's where you set your anchor point that people are going to refer to later on, even if people pull back here and they think they're being reasonable, they're still that far away from the truth. We don't let truth slide. We stand firmly on it. The prison experiment. Reread the part where the psychologist woke up the prisoner. Maybe it's a clue as how to wait. Where's that? Woke up the prisoner. Oh, you're talking when he brings him out of the... Okay. Go up here. Back to reality. So I'll reread this on Joshua's request. Again, how do you bring people back to light? How do you bring them back to truth? How do you wake someone up from the darkness? At this point, Zimbardo had said, listen, after finding they were chanting in the room about how, he was a bad prisoner, prisoner 819, basically shaming him publicly. And at this point, the experimenter Zimbardo had said, listen, you're not prisoner number 819. You are blank, your name. My name is Dr. Zimbardo, and I'm a psychologist. I'm not a prison superintendent, and this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment, and those are students, not prisoners, just like you. Let's go. He stopped crying suddenly, looked up, and replied, okay, let's go, as if nothing had been wrong. What brought him out of it? He was told, like, listen, this isn't what's going on. This is the scenario. And he gave him an out. He didn't put his back up against the wall. He didn't say, hey, it's your fault, you idiot. He didn't say, hey, listen, you're so stupid for, like, listening to this crap still. I can't believe. Listen, I get it, people. I get it. It is so frustrating to have friends, family, our fellow Canadian citizens just digest the lie again and again. But notice in the back to reality, they didn't call him stupid or they didn't label him as fault. Like, that's already what was happening in the environment, and say, you know what I think is a much more effective? Listen, I was duped too. And on that topic, go back here. I was duped too. Currently at work, it's packed in here. That's my brother, the co-owner of Diverge Media. Yeah, he works at Walmart, and so it's packed at Walmart right now. So we're not going to change minds by putting people's back against the wall and telling them they're stupid. That's the environment that's already been created. You're either being shamed one way or the other, or you're, hey, look at me, I'm so good, I'm following the orders so well. Listen, I thought like you. We had the birth of the daughter you hear in the background here 7 months. I want to hold 7? 8 months. 8 months now. 9. Not quite. April. 9? Jeez. She's a COVID baby. She was born literally in her home. And we were scared initially. I didn't know what was going on with COVID. I seen the reports out of China just like everyone else did. I like to think of myself as a pretty logical person. And if you follow our work, I think you would believe, pretty reasonable, pretty logical. I try to source everything directly from the fact. I was duped. So if people that don't have the time and don't put in the same amount of effort, do you really think they're not going to be? We can't just beat them over the head. I'm sick and tired of not getting the results. And ultimately the results are, man, I'm getting emotional, but it's like, we need to change minds, people. We need to change minds. And we're not going to do it by allowing ourselves to be gaslighted, allowing the government to win on that narrative. There are fellow Canadians, there are friends, there are family, there are citizens. We don't put their backs against the wall. I was duped too. That's how we change this narrative. Listen, I understand that you're coming from, you think this is really dangerous, but here's some things that changed my mind. Did you know? Or maybe you haven't heard about this. These are the ways we can introduce these things. Maybe you hadn't heard that, there's 917 hospitalized in Ontario, and that sounds scary, but we also have 384 or 387 hospitals, and that works out to about 2.38 patients per. And things like, they said they invested 300. We'll go pull up a screen share here a second. They invested, you got it? They invested $341 million, allegedly. And I say allegedly because where are these beds? $341 million for additional acute care beds. 1,500 of them were supposed to be made. Well, if there's 900 in hospital and we have 1,500 extra beds, you tell me how we're at critical capacity. We're supposed to have 500 extra critical care beds. There's $341 million that went out the window. And this is how we change those narratives. Listen, I was fooled too, but maybe you didn't know about this. I thought like that too, but maybe you didn't know about this. It's not going to happen when you allow yourself to be gaslighted by the government and allow them to get infighting. We're fighting for the same thing. It's Canada. And as frustrated as I get as an independent journalist trying to bring this out to people, and I do get frustrated, trust me. I just go fact after fact after fact, and it just nobody listens. That's what it feels like. We have a bunch of people that are open-minded, I like to think, that follow our work, but the reality is not many people seem to be listening, and I believe that's my fault. I'm not doing a good enough job at getting the information out to people. If we want things to change, we need to be aware of the environment. We need to be aware of the de-individualization. You're an individual. You think for yourself. This is Canada. This is a free and democratic society. Even though they're ramping up and taking away all the freedoms in front of us, if we start believing that and feeling helpless, we most certainly will be that. I'm free. I'm free today, and I'm going to act like I'm free. And that means not buying into the narrative. And that means questioning things. And when I bring out information, it means doing it in a way that allows other people to believe the same thing. And that's not by putting their back against a corner and telling them that they were wrong. Because guess what? We were all wrong to a certain extent at some point on something in your life. No one's perfect. If we want things to change, we got to be willing to shuck our egos aside. We got to be willing to go, hey, I know I'm right, but that's not what they need to hear right now. So the Milgram experiment, the Stanford prison experiments, people will go to the furthest conclusions if the environment's right. They will go to the point of killing innocent people if the environment's right. The Nazis were just like you. That's an uncomfortable truth. You don't think you could be a Nazi, then you don't get it. They were just like you. The Milgram experiment, 65 or 67% went all the way to the point where they pulled a lever of 450 volts that said XXX. They thought they might be killing a person, and they still did it. I'm just saying, I've never worn a mask and I've never gotten sick will be enough to convince people who believe masks work that it's fake. Maybe it would be. We also need to be aware that everyone wants to admit that they've been duped like we once were. I've been fighting for months to share this information with my own dad, and he's not so scared, and he just shuts me down. Yep. On that topic, we changed plans, our personal family plans. I had my own brother lie to me, and I know I can probably safely speak on this because I know he'll probably never watch it. My own brother lied to me about not being able to come to a Christmas gathering. This was like over a month ago, Kate, 2, 3, at least a month, 3 weeks-ish, and said that, no, there's something coming up that they had to go to, and I didn't want to risk because he just didn't want to have that confrontation. They believe the other way, that this is a super bad thing and that we all need to do our part and just, go along with the narrative. It will get better soon. And every part of me wants to just, I 10 or 12 times the other night just stopped myself from sending a text message, calling him out and saying, listen, I know you lied, because that's not going to benefit and change a mind. In fact, all that's going to do is they're back further into the wall and go, see, I knew I couldn't talk to him about anything. So I send messages like, hey, I love you. I'm thinking about you. Try to keep the door open. Don't burn your bridges. It's Christmas. I'm going to go spend time with family. I'm going to go have a turkey I shouldn't eat because I could say I could do with losing a few pounds, but I'm going to ensure that I'll put a few extra on and eat a bunch of bad food. And I'm going to enjoy the time with family. If we want to change people's mind, we need to be willing to put our ego to the side. You might know you're right. If you follow our work, we do a lot of sourcing directly from medical information. We do a lot of sourcing directly from public health, directly from politicians themselves when they misspeak, like Dr. Yaffe the other day saying the new form of COVID, there's no proof that it's more severe in illness, and this is their theory of why they believe it's more transmissible. Again, it doesn't benefit me to beat people over the head with it. It's a little different from, we're informing on a independent or a media level. But in my personal conversations with people, that's not how I introduce things. I say all this to say, thank you for tuning in to Diverge Media again and again. I'm working on a year-end video, I guess, of a highlight of all our work for the new year. I'm going to hope to get it out for the new year, for New Year's. I want to change minds. It's not enough for me to be popular. I don't care if I'm popular. I want to make this country a better place. And that happens by the truth getting told. That happens by dealing with uncomfortable truths and not just following along. But we need to find a way to do that effectively. And if it ain't, if it's broke, you need to fix it. There's an acronym you can use. Maybe we'll stick with some people. PDCA. Plan, do, check, adjust. Well, I've checked, and our what we're doing is not working. It sucks. We're not convincing anyone. I'm reaching echo chambers. I don't want to reach echo chambers. I want to reach people that don't want to hear what I have to say, and I want them to be open that door for Pandora's box to be opened so that new information can be let in. This year is going to be a tough year. If you thought 2020 was tough, 2021 is going to be tough too. Not to speak like a Debbie Downer, but we need to be realistic. Part of that is, though, that I'm not going to sit by and act as though I can't change things personally. I'm not going to act as though that my actions don't matter. Remember, 1 out of 50 people is all it took to change and stop the Stanford prison experiment. 1 out of 50. You're that one, if you choose to be. I'm that one. I choose to be. It's not that I'm great. It's not that I'm anything special. It's just that I refuse to let the truth slide. I'm going to take a beating on it. I'll let you know. I'm going to take a beating. The more popular we get, mark my words, the more popular we get, the more people that know about our work, the more we're going to get raked over the coals, the more we're going to get mocked. And that's okay, because I love them anyways. I think that's a good place to close it out today. Again, I didn't even really mean to go as long as I did. But it's important. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Love them. Hug them. We don't know how much time we really have on this planet. We don't know when our last days are. So make sure you really live, because everyone dies, but not everyone truly lives. We got hats. We're shipping to the GTA. I'm working on plugging it into the website. $30, no tax. If you're in the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge area, we'll ship to you for $10, so it'll be $40 flat. If you're, up to 2.5 hours away from Kitchener, I'll ship to you for $15, so it'll be $45 flat. Keep up the good work. Real Canucks will listen. Merry Christmas. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Share this like crazy. This is the type of stuff that people need to hear. We'll reiterate it when we're back Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for our regular broadcast. I'm going to go deeper into these things and not just surface level. It's too important. I'm not letting 2021 go by the wayside because I'm scared. I'm not going to cower like the prisoners did in the Stanford experiment. I'm not. I might be emotional on the way. I'm going to be emotional on the way. It's a hard thing. It's hard on me. And I'd be lying to everyone here if I said the stress doesn't get to me. But I'm not going to step down. And by the grace of God and getting strength from him, I will continue. Merry Christmas to everyone. We'll see you next time. And make sure to share this out. Let's try to change minds. Make sure you introduce it in a kind way. Like, man, this kind of opened my mind a little bit differently. I didn't think about it this way. Did you hear about this? We're not beating people over the head. We're not backing them into a corner, because when you back people into a corner, the only thing you leave them to do is fight or flight. And we need them to stand and listen. Emotional camel. Yup. Yeah, that's a reference to our last live stream. I said, I'm an emotional camel. I don't really like people, for the record. I don't really, feel like I need to be around people often. But this year I realized, yeah, I'm an emotional camel. I need that fill once in a while. So I'm going to go hug a bunch of family. I'm going to go love a bunch of people. And I'm going to eat too much turkey, and I'm going to eat a bunch of peanut butter balls because my wife made those and they're amazing. And I'm probably going to be back a couple pounds heavier. Just while we're all in the prison experiment, the trick is realizing the cell door is unlocked. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, everyone. Greg Staley from Diverge Media signing off. I'll see you again Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to know about the hats, message us directly on Facebook at Diverge Media News or at divergemediaoutlook.com. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.